You see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. In this episode, I got the Headless Giant joining me and Ethan Indigo. Before we get to the guest, though, Headless, please, for all the people who may not know who you are yet, or just for the people who do, and just to remind them, let them know where they can find all your amazing work, sir, please.
You can find me on X at the Headless Giant. You can find me on YouTube as the Headless Giant. I have a little show I like to call Uncle Headless's Magical Mailbag. You can send me your occult/magical/dream stories at headlessgiantpodcast@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And seriously, listeners, you got any stories, send that stuff over. And my man, Ethan Indigo, the fourth initiate. What is going on,
Peace,
sir?
guys. Honored to be here. This is going to be really fun. Nick, thanks for putting this together. I am on all the usual social media, and I'm often writing. I've written several books, trying to also write articles frequently, but got one in the works here, soon to be on Occult Research Institute.
Awesome.
And I'm excited to communicate and hear what you got to say, Jules.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ethan. And I got his link in the bottom. And finally, to the guest, somebody I've been dying to get on this show. I had an amazing time with him when I went on his show. We got Jules from the Greypilled Podcast. Jules, my man, let everybody know who you are and what's up and what your deal is.
What's up, guys? Good morning, Sunday morning. I am Jules, the host of the Greypilled Podcast. I have a few other shows that I do, but Greypilled is kind of my main brand that I put all my other stuff under. I have Elohim Etymology that I do with my co-host Adrian West. Sound Science I do with my co-host The Paranoid American. And then I have a show I'm actually doing tonight. I do every other Sunday with my co-host Conspiracy Extremist, called Sunday Chaos. We just hang out for a couple hours, drink a few beers, shoot the shit, talk about politics and culture, and a little bit of degeneracy thrown in there as well. So it's always a fun time. Y'all can come check it out on Rumble and X tonight at 9:00. So yeah, man, no, it's awesome to be here. I've been trying to get on with you for a minute. You came on my show, and then we did a Friday episode together, which was awesome, man.
Yeah,
we talked about a lot of things that you don't really get to talk about with too many people, man. We had discussed that, we have a lot of ideas in common, new takes that you don't really hear every day. And it's always good, I think, to keep searching for the truth. Once you say you know everything, you know nothing, right? And Ethan, I love that, the fourth initiate. I love that. The three initiates, the play off of that. That's pretty cool.
I experience a lot of kind of, I don't know if it's a competition or condescending reaction from fellow writers often enough. So I chose to be so bold as to be the fourth initiate, of course, after the three initiates. And I have an overt obsession with four and sets of four. So
it's awesome, man.
Yeah, he did actually a really good presentation on that. Yeah, that was fun. So Jules, we're gonna get into Sumerian deities. What made you? Was it just that they interest you? What made you actually get into covering that?
Well, originally it was years ago. I was into the ancient alien stuff. I wasn't too much into the esoteric or any kind of occult symbolism. And I kind of took a liking to it. And I started to read a little bit of Sitchin, a little bit of, oh my God, I can't, Lawrence Gardner. There we go. I didn't want to forget his name. And, just kind of reading the Book of Enoch, the Epic of Gilgamesh, some of the Ugaritic texts, like little, the creation stories from Sumeria, the Enuma Elish, and some other ancient texts, and started to kind of put these similarities together. In all of these stories, you find these same, you can call them characters, entities, deities, kind of rebranded throughout time, but you can trace their worship through the symbolism and through the etymology, many things. And so when you start to kind of see the bigger picture, you're like, holy shit, this is just, we are pawns in a battle that's been waging for thousands of years, I think. Being basically, there's two sides in these ancient stories that you see, two clans, so to say. And so you kind of see this throughout time, just, you know, these wars that we're fighting that really we shouldn't be fighting, you know, and the enslavement of humanity as a whole, I think, originated with some of these entities long ago. And so this is a long game that they're playing. But when I started to get into the esoteric and reading Manly Palmer Hall, Steiner, a bunch of other authors, you know, you kind of start to see the symbolism from these entities, from their worship, all this other stuff. And you're like, wait a minute, this has a lot of meanings to it. This could mean a lot of different things. There's a lot of ways to look at it. And I kind of threw off the ancient aliens thing, and it's like, you know, I don't know if space is fake and gay. You know, I do believe, I do believe the earth is hollow. So I don't know. I've been talked about that a few times. I mean, it could be flat and hollow, right? I think we may have mentioned that when we talked before.
It'd be like pita bread.
Yeah. Or a snowman. I don't know. It may look like an egg.
You can make a gyro out of it.
But yeah, dude, like, you know, you can look at it spiritually. You can look at them as basically like maybe they're our predecessors, just ancient humans. And that's where we get all of these proclivities and all these stories being passed down, because all these stories that you read in all these ancient texts, they originate in Sumeria, so it seems. And so, I don't know, man, just when you read about these entities, you see just like a lot of human attributes in them as well. And so I look at them as archetypal beings, and maybe, you know, they cast these archetypes onto us. Maybe they fell and they became our guardian angels, and it's you know, our job to, I don't know, rise up through what people would call Christ, or everyone has their own relationship with Christ. I think if you do have a certain kind of relationship with the Holy Spirit, I don't like, you know, you'll talk about Christ consciousness, and a bunch of people will be like, well, that's disinformation, that's new age, that's deceptive. And it's like, well, wait a minute, what makes this person's relationship any different than yours, right? Like, who are you to judge this person if they are, you know, walking in close contact with the Holy Spirit? I know I'm going off on this tangent now, but, you know, so you get a lot of pushback on that. But I don't know, man, I think religion is a tool being used to pin a lot of people against each other. Like I said, pin humanity against each other. And that kind of goes back to these ancient stories as well. And I've been kind of digging into that a lot lately, where a lot of these names originated. And so, yeah, man, I just took an interest to it. I started making pantheon charts and the whole thing. And you know, I need to go ahead and remake them. Probably it's been about a year, but that's what first got me started. I was like, dude, I've researched a lot of this stuff. I've read a lot of these books. I need to talk about it because I'm driving my wife crazy. And, but you know, I don't know, man. What's up?
If I could hop in. So, you could view a lot of this conflict, like you're talking about, with the East versus West divide, right? So you've got on one side of this Bosphorus River, this dividing line between Asia and Europe, as being where this sort of migration of beliefs start to come in. So, for example, you've got Anu over here in Mesopotamia, and over on the other side, they call him Uranos. So these differences, they translate from one place to the other, and you see a lot of this Dionysus worship coming from this region, changing its form, because originally it's like Attis worship in the central part of Anatolia or Turkey, and then it shifts over and it becomes this kind of Dionysus worship over in Greece. So a lot of this translation stuff starts to happen across this Bosphorus River that goes right up to the Black Sea, and where we see all this conflict happening today. You've got the ancient war between the Trojans and the Greeks, right on that line. The very first divide between East and West is right through there. And so really understanding this stuff allows you to understand the history of this East versus West conflict at a really fundamental level that we're still going through.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, it's funny how you say that about Anu, because you could say the same thing with Ahura Mazda. In Egypt, he was known as Ani, so you just change one letter there. And in those stories, like it's crazy. You really only see Anu when they talk about him coming to Earth. You only see him come to Earth a couple times. So it's like he has this hierarchy above all these other beings. And it's like, it's when you look at the hierarchies of angels and stuff, it's like, who is this guy, But you find that with most of these deities, man. You find these translations of their names usually all goes back to one place, whether it's what we were saying earlier before the show, if it's On or Zu or Ki, Nin. You find a lot of it that traces back to Sumeria. And then when you put it next to these stories, it's like, okay, well, this is the same person that they're talking about now. Is this symbolic, or is this a physical, being, entity, whatever you want to call it. Some people look at it spiritually. Some people look at it as ancient humans, physically incarnating, reincarnation chambers, right? Though talks about that, or there's been people talking about, there's theories of, things underneath the pyramid, underneath the Sphinx. And then you read about the halls of Amenti, which I think is maybe just like in Akashic realm or something. That's where you get like the emerald tablets. They're emerald because they're alchemical, right? They're in the ether. It's like the stuff that Edgar Cayce kind of tapped into. And it's the same, I think, with like the Mormons and the golden tablets, right? Like that's the final process of alchemy, right? To turn into gold. And so I think that has something to do with it as well. So yeah, man, I mean, this stuff really interested me because you kind of get to see who is in control today. Because you see like the eagle everywhere, right? Like it's on our flag. But you also see the serpent in a lot of places as well. And that goes back to these two sides warring for thousands of years. It talks about before humanity was really ever like right when they were created, basically. So it says that they created us in their, in their image and their stories. And they created like many versions of Adam or something. Like there are multiple Adams in these stories. You have Adamu, you have Adapa, and Adapa being the last one, being basically a king in Sumeria. Like this guy, like the same thing with Noah, right? Utnapishtim or Ziusudra was a Sumerian king. When you look at the Sumerian kings list, you see that. So there's a lot that we're not told that I think you can find in these other texts. And take it with a grain of salt, like do your own research. But from the research I've done, you can connect these things pretty well, if you know what you're talking about. I hope y'all don't hear screaming. I have a 3-year-old.
It was a little low. It's fine. It's fine. I deal with a lot worse. You're fine.
So, Feathered serpent. Yeah, the feathered serpent. You see that all throughout South America. We actually just did, what was it, part 2 on Ningazita, who is Ea or Enki's middle son, also known as Thoth, Hermes, Tahuti. You see him break off from Egypt and go to South America with the Olmecs and kickstart all these civilizations down there. And he's worshipped as the plumed serpent, the feathered serpent. I think when you really start to look at these entities, you see a lot of dualism in it as well. You see them, like, I don't really look at them as good or bad. I think a lot of them are probably, they acted pretty shitty. They acted shitty towards each other as well. And they knew what they were doing was against whoever created everything, the creator, what they call the creator of all. They know that they're fucking up, that they're doing wrong, and that they're going to face consequences for it, but they do it anyway, thus the fall of the angels. And so, you just kind of keep seeing them rebranded throughout time. And I mean, it could be, they had like the demigods in Greece and Rome. I've definitely looked into all that being symbolic and nothing else, right? But like maybe that's the hybrid children of these fallen beings that they used, like this fallen angel DNA genetic tinkering to create, as well as in vitro fertilization. Yeah, this was used all the way back then as well. From the research my co-host Adrian has done, that's how the Mesopotamian god of the sea was created, Enki. He was an egg birth.
I was going to say, I could be wrong, but this really isn't so much the deities. I guess it's more of the text of the story. But I thought, if I remember correctly, like there is, like at some point they do talk about how somebody came into being, and it like literally is like kind of like the way we have science now with making like test tube babies. Yeah, like don't they mention that they took this from that and this from there, and then they kind of like mixed it together?
No, man,
like that kind of sounds like what we're doing now.
Oh, dude, it's rebranded. That's all they're doing, and like it talks about taking dirt from Nibiru, whether that be another dimension, another planet, somewhere beyond the ice wall, whatever you want to call it. Taking dirt from there, like some of their semen, their spit, and like, putting it in a tube, shaking it up, and just fucking, let's see what we can create here. And they create all sorts of these beings, and most of them, they can't talk. It speaks about their ability to hold tools. That was very important, because if you read about like the gold mining operations, which is one of the ancient alien theories, obviously, but that makes sense. Like they call it the mana atomic gold and the mana from heaven. I don't know. You see these depictions of these beings with this little bag that they're carrying all the time.
They got the little
and
purse.
I think that's what they had in that bag, was this mana that would keep them living so long and keep them, kind of in line with how. Because when you look at these stories, it talks about.
Well, Raphael, just real quick, I want to throw in there. I think there is one quote somewhere in the Bible where I think they do consider Raphael like having like a thing of ointment with him that was healing, and I've always wondered if that like kind of maybe even goes back to that bag.
Christing.
Yeah, some shit like that.
Yeah.
Christ means the anointer. And so having one of these angels as being the Christ, because Christ wasn't a novel concept to the Greeks. They understood it. That was part of their rituals. And so when they talked about Jesus the Christ thing, they understood that as being sort of like this holy man who would anoint. So there was a crossover there between these different cultural practices that they could understand.
I think the symbolism there is related to the becoming of golden and more enlightened. And one idea in an alchemical and actually a Tai Chi, Qigong concept is maintaining the hermetic seal, right? And that in a very energetic, physical sense that we will often release our energy without even knowing it. And so we have to have be a sealed unit to develop our golden attributes, if you will. I think it's a fascinating pantheon of ideas that sometimes answers questions we might have, and sometimes other symbological relationships from Egypt or even the East and so forth might answer questions that these depictions and symbological lessons might cause us to ask. One combination of snake and bird symbolism from the East, I think, is valuable in that it is from martial arts and these arts of development, and I think it kind of points to that in this lesson. So the origination of Tai Chi and actually a few other martial arts has a story where the aesthetic in the mountains, in the woods, is observing a snake and a crane battle. And he notices how they move in these coiling fashions, and the snake can be rooted and be in one place or another, and the bird is using its beak and its feathers and its one leg or another, and that is where he conceptualizes the art of Tai Chi, which is really the art of self-development in martial arts format, through the combination of those two energies. So I think that is often one that's not looked at in regards to the feather and the serpent idea. So I just wanted to
I
share
never
that.
heard that before, actually. That is wild. That is interesting. Thank you.
It's very interesting. I love hearing symbolic takes on this stuff, dude, because it really it helps my research a lot more. Yeah. You see, because some people will be like, well, yeah, they were part animal and all this. It's like, no, I'm starting to think that a lot of that animal symbolism is symbolism. For instance, with Thoth, you see the ibis bird, and that represents, the ibis bird digs deep down into the ground, into the soil to bring up sustenance. So it represents digging down and bringing out of darkness into the light, right? And it's the same thing with the eagle symbolism, which if you read about the occult symbolism of birds, you see that the eagle in most mystery schools and esoteric traditions is just a rebranding of the phoenix, right? This ancient alchemical bird that lives for 500 years and at the end of those years dies and rises. It says a worm rises out of the ashes basically and turns into this bird. Yeah, that's what Manly P. Hall writes about. And so I find that very fascinating. Now, I don't know if a phoenix is an actual bird, like if it actually exists, because it does say that only one can exist at each time. But when you see like the eagle and a lot of these other larger birds, it is symbolic of the phoenix. And like what you were saying, that changing that you have internally, I think, from your lower self into your higher self, or what some people call your Christ, right? And so it's the same thing with the serpent too. Like, and that's when you go back to these clans and who was kind of represented as what, and you see that there is this family tree. These guys have these kids, and they usually have them with their sister. That's where you see like the story of Zeus and Hera, Osiris and Isis. Like they have this sister wife, right? And it's like that literally with every single one of them. They like where keeping it in the family comes from, I think, and that's where all these elite royal bloodlines they inbreed. All right, 1,000 years of inbreeding. and you get one of them jaws or whatever.
You know what? You know what's really interesting? I was thinking about this, and like, it's just, it's a little out there. It's because I'm stoned. But like, if you think about like Egyptian mythology, if you think about Egyptian mythology, they got some wild, twisted fucking stories, man.
Yeah.
Like sexually deviant in some ways. And the thing is, it's just like, nowadays, all these ideas that we have with sexuality, would we know them unless somebody gave us the idea to run with, to choose from? And I'm wondering, was that even a way just to throw out degeneracy into stories, into the public, for them to think of like, oh, I'll act like that since that's what they did. You know what I'm saying? Not to sound crazy. It was just like a thought that I had, that I was like, is that even a way of implanting options for you to act on?
Yeah, or if they seeded a lot of these bloodlines that we came from, is it genetic? Right? Like, do we have to fight the urge to overcome, what was passed down in our genes? I don't know, man. There's a lot of ways to look at that. But yeah, and then that goes to like the symbolism and each one, because what I try to explain a bunch is that there is no one Satan. Satan means adversary. And even in the biblical text and all these ancient texts, there's many adversaries, even like adversaries to the fallen Elohim, the Anunnaki, whatever you want to call them. And so you see this story kind of played out. And that's when you really get into it. For me, it was the story of Marduk, also known as Namshub, Amar Utu, Asar Luhi. That's another word you see is Asar. That was the original name of Osiris, coming from basically means scorcher. It's representing the dog star Sirius. And if you look at Sirius Radio, you'll see their logo is a dog head with a star on his eye, right? It can't be any more clear than that. But yeah, like I said, I think the dog that, like, I don't think that now I don't know. My co-host Adrian, man, like he has this book right here. I'm going to go ahead and grift this real fast, guys. Pantheon 1, The Golden Veins. He had written this. You see my ring light and the reflection. There we go. This is the first out of 6 that he's been writing. And his research is fascinating, but he does talk about Enki being an egg birth and coming from basically being a truce in between two ancient alien races. How do I explain it? It's in vitro fertilization. He was an egg birth, but so Anu really wasn't his father, if that makes any kind of sense. And Leal, who some people may know as El or Saturn Cronus, he is his stepbrother, and that's why you see so much fighting. It's like they're not even brothers; they're just stepbrothers. But basically, there is a queen of the Pleiades named Maya, this reptilian goddess, right? Queen, and her and Anu have Enki out of this agreement to form a bond in between their races, which is from Orion and Sirius. And that's, of course, you see Osiris. He was one of those beings too that was kind of, I think, from both of those different genetic lines, if you believe in that stuff. Because you see, he was a green dude, right? Dude was green, so was Ptah. Ptah is also Enki in Egypt. Like he was kind of behind the scenes, watching his sons rule everything. But the story of Marduk, and I've talked about this guy so many fucking times now, man, is one of the things that really interested me, because this is when you get into the book of Enoch and you read about Azazel and Semyaza, and you can read the same story, coming out of Sumeria as well. And Sitchin's interpretations may not be 100% correct. I've accepted that, and I'd take what he says with a grain of salt as well. But when you start to link these stories to other stories, it's kind of like, okay, well, are all these people wrong? But you kind of see that story with Marduk. He was outcast from every single one of their civilizations. He would form his own city and they would go bomb it, or they would try to wipe him because he was the first one to mate with a human woman. Well, really, it was his father, but his father kept that from everybody and kind of let his son be the scapegoat. That's what Azazel means, is scapegoat. And so that story is what kind of pulled me into researching about that side of the family. And you see him in Isaiah as Bel, his son Nabu being Nebo. Like, so you see these names everywhere and you're like, this is the same fucking story. Like, these guys were being worked, you know? And some people don't see it that way, and that's fine. You know, like I said, do your own research, but it's fascinating to me. It's fascinating to me. And I think we can figure out a lot about humanity and how not to repeat past mistakes through some of these stories, you know? Definitely.
Well, an interesting way to put it, I don't know if you've ever heard of the story of the 10,000, but there were 10,000 of these mercenaries from Greece that were used by the Persians to go smash their enemies. And what ended up happening is the guy who hired them ended up dying on the battlefield. So they were stranded. They had no way of getting home. So they had to make it back through this land that was hostile to them up to the Black Sea region so that they could make it across into their home territory without being killed by these, armies they were hired to kill. And they're going through all of the ruins of these Sumerian towns, right? They were all ruins by the time the Greeks were there. They had, no interaction. And what's funny is they were worshiping gods based off of these gods in Sumer, and they had no idea what they were looking at. So as they're looking at all these ancient ruins, they're actually still continuing the worship, even in their home territories, but they didn't know what they were looking at when they were seeing them firsthand. So it's kind of interesting because all of these kind of beliefs really did build off of each other. So even in the Greek era, they were using a lot of the stuff from this Babylonian and all that kind of world that was way before them.
Yeah, man, it's just rebranded. That's why I had went on Tinfoil Hat recently, and I actually talked about that a bunch, how it is just these rebranded deities that you see throughout these civilizations. But yeah, man, like you had brought up, who was it? Nergal earlier, I think. What do you think about that guy?
Well, what's interesting to me about Nergal is he's the god of war, right? And so he comes out in the spring because in the spring, that's what the Babylonians, Assyrians, Sumerians considered the war season. Everybody had harvested all their grain and stuff from the previous times, and now it was the time to fight. And so Nergal comes out in the spring, and then he goes back down into the underworld during the fall and winter. So he's like a direct interpretation of what the Greeks saw as Persephone. So Persephone is the goddess that brings all the world back to life. And yet at the same time, like, you've got this different vision of the same kind of deity over there as Nergal, which is all about blood and disgust. I mean, like, you could talk about Nergal all day long, but it's like the way these two deities had translated was completely different based off of what they were experiencing in the land that they were at. The Greeks didn't necessarily like war. They used it, but, it wasn't necessarily the pinnacle of existence for them. Whereas over in Sumerian Babylon, that was the pinnacle of their existence, is to get out there on the battlefield and crush some skulls, And they put it in all of their artwork too. It was just a massive bloody mess over there. All of the art was just them stomping their enemies into, bloody piles on the ground. And yet in the Greek side of things, they're using a lot of the same deities, but not the same result,
Yeah. No, the ancient stories are a lot more when you get into that. So Nergal, being the king of the underworld, was actually, it's funny that you bring that up because I've also looked at that as being maybe symbolic because, what is it? The Gregorian calendar. I think how it changed the beginning of the year is really supposed to be in March, right? And so it's like fresh out of sleep from the winter, the dead of winter, and like blossomed into spring. It's like, yeah, that would be probably the most ideal time for war. You're all rested up from the year. So when you talk about going back into the underworld in these stories is interpreted as the mines in South Africa. And yeah, Persephone would line right up with the wife of Nergal, his cousin. Actually, no, his niece. Trying to think about where she lines up. Erishkigal, which in some of these stories, they have a daughter named Lalitu, who you could translate directly to Lilith, being the first wife of the king Adapa, Adam. And so there's a lot to get into there, but Persephone definitely aligns with Erishkigal, his wife, the sister of Ishtar. And, you know, there's the story, because like I said earlier, these beings they're killing each other, trying to kill each other in all these stories, especially with Marduk killing his youngest brother, Tammuz, or Dumuzi. Dumu. There's a lot of names. Like, dude, I keep finding more and more names. The more like ancient tribes you look into, and if you go into Asia, if you go into like even the Aboriginals from Australia have their own pantheon of these deities as well. It's crazy, dude. My co-host sent me this pantheon chart, and I'm trying to digest it. I'm just like, holy shit, it's going to take me a while to even be able to talk about all this, you know?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to the idea that there are these fundamental forces within human psychology that really branches out to all these different tribes that are disconnected, because we have a lot of the same wiring. And so you see that translated in how similar their gods are. And the ancient people picked up on this almost immediately. And so they started doing syncretism, where they would look at the different gods and then, you know, try and compare them against their own. And having that syncretism gave you a much easier path towards communication, because all these gods aren't just gods, they're part of the language, right? So all of these stories and all of this stuff, this directly translated into the language in a very real sense. I don't know if you guys have seen that Star Trek episode where it was Star Trek The Next Generation, and Picard has to communicate with this guy who can only speak in ancient mythology, right? That's the only way they communicate. So he's got to learn all these stories just by the way the guy is referring to things. And essentially, he has to learn the stories through the language. And then by using that story, he can make his own responses back to him, even though he has no idea what the rest of the context is. On some level, that's what they're communicating with, is the idea that these ancient stories tell them who they are. And like you were saying earlier, the past is like a completely undiscovered country. Like once you go back there and see how these cultures are translated, you can pick out the different influences, but it's not immediately obvious until you're at that point in time, you know. And what we're doing now, I think, is trying to reconstruct a little bit of that to give you a deeper look into the psychology of these people, because that's our psychology too. It gets translated directly to us. We're like a layer cake of civilizations. And so having that understanding of Sumeria actually gives us a better understanding of ourselves.
Absolutely, dude. And then you look at these pantheons and you're like, wait a minute, you know, are these other pantheons, these newer pantheons, are they just interpretations that these people made from looking at this last group of gods, right? Like, so the farther you go back, you do see more and more similarities. And that's why I think looking at some of these ancient stories, some people want to discount them as just being myths or whatever. I like I said, I try to look at them through a few different lenses. But and then when you get into like the Canaanite pantheon and the Phoenician pantheon, you know, you see Yahweh being the war god brother of Baal. You're like, what's that about? He's the son of El? Who's El? Oh, shit. You know? And so, you know, there's a lot going on there. And then you have certain interpretations, like, who was it? Blavatsky, maybe, who had the interpretation of Jonah and the whale. I actually thought this was very interesting, that he was captured by Phoenician sailors, because, you know, they were a seafaring country, probably the best in time. And they basically put him inside of a statue of Dagon for 3 days to keep him prisoner, and then let him go. And you're like, wait a minute, what? It kind of makes sense, right? And if he went and told this story, he's like, yeah, they kept me inside of this fish for 3 days. But then you have the 3 days also being symbolic, right?
Where was he going?
Huh?
Where was he going? Do you remember?
I don't. I'd have to look. I'd have to look at it again, man.
It was Nineveh.
Okay.
He was going to Nineveh, and if you know anything about Iraq geography, Nineveh is nowhere near the ocean.
Really?
So, yeah, what is he doing going to Nineveh, which is in the northern part of Iraq? Again, nowhere near the ocean, and he's in a whale? This doesn't make a lot of sense, but then you realize that whole territory up in there was Canaanite Phoenician.
Exactly, dude.
So,
yeah, absolutely. And then, but see, then you get into that and you look at Dagon, right? But then you also look at Yam, who is another god of the ocean. And so if you try to connect that with Enki, you're like, well, which one is Enki? I've learned to just kind of chalk it up to one or the other. But I still think it's pretty fascinating, especially when you look at the story of Baal, Anat, Yam, and Mot, and El, and you see the same same thing going on in Sumeria. It's just like, okay, dude, that made it real fun for me with the Pantheon stuff, especially when you keep going into Egypt, and then you learn that most of Egypt was really just like children of Marduk. And from what it says, like some daughters of Semyaza or something, like he was, who was he? I'm pretty positive he is the fallen angel from the apocryphal text Azza, or Uzzah, because you have that last of his name being Semyaza, right?
Well, you're forgetting the Hyksos. So the Hyksos was that sort of go-between between the Egyptians and the Canaanite Phoenicians up there. It's because the Hyksos invaded Egypt several times. So there's a lot of history between those two cultures and a lot of overlap as well. So you've got a tribal influence as well.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and he's the one who passed on the heavenly arcana to Solomon, you know? And so I don't know, but you see that side of the Pantheon in this side of the world at the time, and it makes sense. And so then you look to where these other people are, and they're all stationed. They all have their own areas where they have kingship over. And it's all,
all these city-states all had their own deities that were, sovereign for them. And this goes back. None of this religion stuff back then was about faith. None of it was about faith. So if you had a deity in your town, that was the town mascot. That was the town everything, right? So the cities for Marduk were Mardukian cities, right? So it flavored everything. And their oracles were all based around that and all the rest of that stuff. So in a lot of ways, we did kind of start out as henotheists, because as these tribes split from each other and created these different towns and stuff, that local town became their, one god above the other gods, right? So it was never like, unless you get in the Greece region where they went back to like more pure polytheism, where every god was, pretty much the equal on this Olympian pantheon. But over there, they were all henotheists. So, they would have basically raids trying to steal each other's gods, and that plays a huge part, because once you've stolen their god, how can they claim that it's more powerful than yours? And I mean, look, we're
dude.
the winners. We stole your god.
So we'll rebrand it as our god, right? Give him this name and these attributes. Yeah, even in Greece, man, when you look at the Olympians and the Titans, it's like two hierarchies of angels. Like you have these first kind of elder angels that came down thousands of years before they even allowed these lesser angels to come down. And then, of course, they fell. And that was Marduk, Semyaza, Utu, Shamash, this younger generation of the Anunnaki, who I think are worshipped today in many different groups. And come on, shut up. You got kids and dogs and everybody making noise. Nobody wants me to podcast.
I was thinking about one of the attributes of Set from Egypt being related to the war god you guys were describing. He hit one of his symbols that he's related to is the plow, and he is the god of chaos, and so he'll come in and plow the field, which is totally chaotic, but for a refined reason. And part of my obsession with 4 is I find many pantheons and many theological origination stories have a set of 4 that is distinct in the presentation. And in Egypt, I find there's Horus and Isis. And I was going to say that sometimes the feminine being the sister and mother even and wife or consort is just kind of this combination of all feminine attributes, the one type of thing. So that maybe the divine feminine symbolism there. But there's Horus and Isis, and then there's Osiris and Set. So it's just interesting that there's these set of 4 or a 4 base in a lot of the religious and theological systems.
Dude, yeah. And when you get into Horus, because you look at the symbolism of like the left and the right eye, right? You have your eye of Ra, your eye of Horus, Ra being equivalent, in my opinion, to Marduk. The eye of Horus is feminine, right? And so it's kind of, and my co-host Adrian has a theory that the real father of Horus was actually Thoth, because Isis did her name coming from Sumeria, or coming from these all these nations before Egypt, these civilizations, was Asta, and she was the wife of Asar or Osiris. And like I said, Asar means scorcher, representing Sirius. And then you have Set and Nephthys, I think. Now, in Sitchin's version, he talks about Nephthys and Asta being daughters of Shamgaz or Semyaza. Now, I don't know where he got that, but I think it is kind of interesting, because throughout the story, you see him and Marduk kind of side by side, and like Semyaza's this voice in Marduk's ear, like, yeah, you should marry this woman from Earth. I'll bring the rest of the angels down and we can all take wives for ourselves. Now, I don't know if they were actually procreating with them or if it was just another form of DNA manipulation, this genetic tinkering that I was talking about. But in the biblical text, you see that it says they mated with the beast of the land, birds in the air, creatures of the sea, and all creeping things. Now, I don't know what a creeping thing is, but I have a pretty good guess of what it is, right? Is it some kind of like ancient cryptid being that was here already? Or was it maybe another hybrid being that these guys created? I'm thinking the latter, to be honest with you, because in these experiments, it does talk about them creating a lot of these Bigfoot-esque creatures. Sasquatch,
Well,
kind of looking like Sasquatch, I'd say.
Yeah, there's some depictions that does, unfortunately.
You can't count out the Dogman and Anubis as being one of the strongest connections. And we've also got the cynocephali. They were reported on by the Romans, and so you've got a lot of stuff having to do with cryptids going on.
Saint Christopher was depicted with a dog head, right? Yeah.
we go.
Yeah. That's wild too, man. Like then when you dig further into that and you get into interdimensional dog man and interdimensional Bigfoot, you're like, well, where did they get these abilities to do this, to have telepathy powers? A lot of people say when they encounter one of these creatures that they don't talk, they communicate with them with their mind. And so I would think they may have some of this fallen DNA kind of gene makeup in them. Now that's just a theory of mine. The dog symbolism goes real deep because it's like the inversion of man, right? It's God backwards, and so it's like, and then when you look into more animal symbolism, I did like 10 episodes on this, so I kind of go on it a bunch, but
I had an idea that you'll probably like. So if you look at how central this dog star symbolism is, in all this stuff, the dog star Sirius is always central to it. Well, if you think about it, when you spell God backwards, you get dog. And the closest thing to a God that we can experience is ourselves in the eyes of a dog, right? They're looking at us like a God. And maybe that's where that symbol comes in, is because they want to be like the trainers for the rest of these things that will look at them like a God. So all of this serious symbolism really has a lot to do with their own perception of themselves as being sort of like the trainers of man. Like, we're the ones who gave you the ability to sit and roll over for us.
Yeah, and even by the Great Pyramids in Egypt, there are these dogs that have all hung out around there for thousands of years that are still roaming around there. I don't know if you would like kind of relate them to dingoes, maybe. I don't know, but apparently they're pretty cool. But when you get into the animal symbolism, a lot of it is just like our lower nature, right? Like the animalistic nature of man. And before I learned about all this, I have a lot of animal heads tattooed all over my body. And it kind of makes sense now to me. Like, is it like a representation of like my lower nature being that of the body, right? The carnal nature of man. I think so. So there, and then the bird being more of like, soaring towards the heavens, being kind of a part of our higher self in some way, right? And so, yeah, man, that stuff, that's some stuff that I'm still learning about, man. That's probably one of my favorite things that I've been getting into is, these little books that I read. They're little Manly Palmer Hall books. They're like a treatise, like it's just a small collection of a much larger book. I'm sure you can find a lot of it in the Secret Teachings. But one of these that I've read lately, dude, is this one. I don't know if you guys have gotten into this one yet. Basically, natural occultism.
No.
And man, yeah, no, it's fascinating. It's fascinating, dude. What's up?
I saw them look up a PDF, hopefully on Internet Archive.
Yeah, no, definitely. What's up?
Go ahead, Ellis. Sorry.
So this book right here, it's called The Golden Ass, right? And this one was written 2nd century AD. So this is written in Latin. It was a novel for the Romans, for Roman consumption. And it has to do with the first vampires. It has to do with the world's first donkey show.
Holy shit.
It has to do with transformation, magic, and all the rest of that stuff back then. And it ends with the main character being transformed back into a man from being a donkey. And he goes and worships Isis, right? And eventually, while worshiping Isis, he becomes the husband of Isis, and he goes through the Osiris initiation, which they say took place in Rome.
The
His journey,
rituals. Yeah.
Right. So his journey ended as a donkey in, I believe it was either Thessaly. That's where he started. Either Thessaly or in Egypt. But basically, he's saved from being a donkey by this Isis character who told her priests to bring roses for him to eat. And so when he eats the roses, that's when he transforms back into a man. So you've got a lot of symbolism about Rosicrucianism, all the rest of that stuff in that book. And it's like, wow, this is like the Codex.
Yeah, Sorry, Ethan. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say real quick, isn't it interesting that the donkey kind of is a metaphorical representative of like the failed horse,
the jackass,
right? It's not quite as good as the real deal, like Don Quixote, Don Quixotic. But Headless, isn't there a god and I believe it's Gnostic or Christian that has that's the donkey-headed god?
I'm looking it up right now.
You're going to do this to me. Okay.
I'm looking it up. Don't worry about it.
So
Set is depicted.
Right.
Yeah, Ethan. Set is depicted with a donkey head. The donkey-headed god may also refer to Brahma, a Hindu god with the fifth head in shape of a donkey. Okay.
What a lot of people don't realize about 1st and 2nd century AD is there were a lot of Hindu missionaries and Buddhist missionaries in that part of the world, in Mesopotamia. So that's what they were talking about. But at the same time, too, the golden ass is also a representation of Christianity and sort of this salvation motif, because during that time, Christianity was really big, and they called Christians annulators. The very first depiction of a Christian in Rome was a guy worshiping a donkey-headed man on a cross.
Well, Christ rode in on a donkey, right?
A donkey, because what they were saying is that all of these Jews, who are the inversion of the rest of these polytheists, were worshiping Set, because Moses rode on the donkey too. And so they called Christians annulators because they would say, yow, yow. That's the way they praised God back then.
That's the name.
Yow, which sounded like, to them, the sound of a donkey. So you had Gnostics who said that. You had Romans. You had Greeks who were calling them annulators and worshiping this donkey. And what really gives it away, though, is this, it's Diodorus, who is writing about the reign of, his name is Antiochus Epiphanes. So Antiochus is trying to capture Alexandria. And so he runs up against the Romans, who are like, you're not going to take Alexandria. You can cut that out. He was a Seleucidian. And so he's there fighting against the Romans. The Romans say, you've conquered the rest of Egypt. You can't go any farther. And so he has to go back to Israel. And what he finds in Israel is that they've got this guy, this Greek dude, that they're going to sacrifice at the Temple of Solomon. And so he gets really pissed off and decides to go on a pig's blood party. He slits open a pig and he just starts spraying it all over the temple, because obviously they hate the fucking pig. And he's spraying pig's blood everywhere and forcing the Jewish authorities to drink boiled down pig's blood, because he says, you're not going to get away with sacrificing Greeks anymore, because he was a Greek guy and he was kind of the owner of the region. And they call this in the Bible the abomination desolation, which happens in the time of Epiphanes and not in the time of Daniel, when they attribute it to the Sumerians not the Sumerians, but the Babylonians who were conquering back then. So they take a recent event and they backdate it in the book of Daniel to the time of these Babylonians that are basically rampaging and starting the first, what do they call it? The first, where they separate and they're no longer the same nation. Anyways, but that's what the whole Bible essentially does, is they backdate all of their prophecies based off of what's happening around them at the time. And really, when you read the book of Maccabees, compare it to the history by Diodorus, the whole thing kind of unravels.
Yeah, you find that a lot with some of these biblical texts. So I saw this. You're right about Gnosticism having to do with the donkey. The donkey-headed god may also refer to Yaldabaoth, a figure that developed from the idea of Seth, but as well as you said,
Yaldabaoth too.
Iao, or what was it?
EIO, that's how they
EIO.
Yeah.
Old MacDonald had a farm, EIO, right? Surrounded. Okay, so a donkey-headed deity, Yao, surrounded by the names, excuse me, Uriel, Suriel, Gabriel, and Michael. The donkey, despite its usefulness, was often seen as a symbol of stubbornness and stupidity in various cultures, making the donkey imagery a powerful tool for religious and cultural slander. So, yeah, I mean, that's where, you got the word jackass. That's where we get the word ass from, right?
There was a big golden donkey head inside of the temple, inside of Solomon's temple. And so what are they doing worshiping a giant donkey head? In the book of Maccabees, they say they stole our inner treasures, but they don't say what they are. You got to go over to Diodorus to find out what the inner temple treasures were. And he says it was a giant statue of Moses riding a donkey and a big golden donkey head that went on the front of the temple. And so they don't mention it in Maccabees, but later on they lose all of this sort of donkey worship, and they're like, no, forget about that stuff. Just like from Elohim to Yahweh. It's like, no, forget, we had that Elohim title before and we were talking about polytheism, but now we're going over to Yahoo or Yahweh as our one symbol of faith. And so they have these rewrites occasionally where it's just like, what's happening here? You find it in the Bible and it's like, where's that coming from? But you got to learn the native culture and the stuff that was surrounding them to really get a good idea of what they were talking about.
Someone in the chat mentioned how they found it interesting that the donkey is a hybrid. And that kind of made me think when you mentioned too how Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. He also was a hybridization, right, of Roman, Greek, and Jewish ideas, right? Even in his name, right? You have the Joshua and the Christos. So interesting kind of to the idea too of how syncretic or adoptive or conquering of other ideas and gods that they were at that time.
That was a big problem when it came to Antiochus, is because they had the Hellenized Jews who wanted to go along with Antiochus Epiphanes, and then you had the other ones who were saying, no, we can't do this. We need to rebel. We need to fight back. And so the Hellenized Jews were looked at as like outcasts within Jewish society, and those Hellenized Jews went on to become other sects like the Essenes. So, and the Essenes were where you see Jesus emerging from, and you kind of get this idea that there is a big conflict going on within Judaism. And what do we find? Well, this sect of Judaism that are related to these Hellenized Jews are saying, look, we need to go into all the world and preach the gospel. Well, that's kind of strange because the whole idea of Judaism is being set apart from the rest of the world, and you can't really go out there and minister to them. So you get this big split happening, and that's when you see Christianity start to emerge everywhere.
Yeah, man. Yeah, no, that stuff is fascinating to me, dude.
One thing I did want to add before we get in, I wanted to bring it up before, and then we kind of got off of it, and we kind of touched on it again here. And not to get too off again with like eyeball stuff, but something I do wonder about when it comes to occult symbolism, especially with animals. Even when we did, oh God, I forgot what it was, spider and scorpion symbolism or whatever it was. Whatever. Even with the scorpion, Headless brought it up. With the scorpion, I do think, especially birds, but there is a lot of animals. Bees being one of them, reindeer being another one for Christmas. If you start looking at like a lot of animals that are even used for occult symbolism, they all have different, like their eyes, they see different stuff that we don't see. Like a lot of them see in UV and we don't. And I do actually wonder if that has anything to do with it, or this like certain actual differences between the animals and the humans. I actually do wonder if that's part of it. Like the reason I was even bringing up the scorpion before is that when we were talking about that, Headless had said something that he thought like there was an eyeball on the tail, and then like people started Googling it that was on the show, and they were like, the whole fucking shell is a retina. Like that's fucking wild,
dude.
And that thing's used as symbolism. And again, it's something different about it. It goes back to the eyeball.
That's wild.
I do. Again, occult. The root word would be ocular.
Yeah. The hidden. I mean, Yeah, and what you said, Headless, about the Essenes, that's a different discussion right there, man. That stuff is one of the most fascinating topics to me. And you see the same thing with the Gnostics and the Cathars and all these other, earlier sects of Christianity, man. It's really fascinating stuff. And some of this wisdom is like, why is some of this stuff kept from us? Why is it being gate kept? I don't know how you would say that.
I know what you mean, though.
Gate kept? Yeah.
Well, the Roman censors have a lot to do with this stuff. So the Roman censor was a official position in the Roman temple. And the head Roman censor, which was Julius Caesar for a while, was called Pontifex Maximus. And the job of the Roman censor was to go around making sure that all of the citizens were breeding. That was his main job, because you always had to have a flow of new people coming in. And so his other job was to get rid of foreign influences that would change the nature of Rome. And so, a lot of times they had their own pantheon, and basically anybody that wanted to bring their stuff there, they could do that, but they wouldn't be officially recognized. And the official recognition had to be maintained, and the Roman censor was the guy who would do that. Well, in a lot of ways, when they made the switch over to Christianity, the Roman censor became the most powerful position in Rome, because Pontifex Maximus didn't change from being a pagan position to being a Christian position. Now that's what they just call the Pope. So the Roman censor basically said, this is the way it has to be, and this is the way it has to be written, and everybody would do it that way because he was the one in charge of the cultural influences.
Yeah. And, whoever wins the battles, to the victors go the spoils, right? Like, history is written by the people who win. And, it's just funny to me. Like, you see, King James was a Freemason. Martin Luther was a Rosicrucian. You can see it in his seal. There's a giant rose on the front of it, right? Charles Taze Russell, who started the Jehovah's Witnesses, was a devout Satanist.
So, you got the Mormon guy. Look at him.
I was saying, contacted an angel named Moroni. Moroni sounds a lot like Merodach, like Marduk.
Sounds like Moron too.
Yeah, golden tablets. He was tapping into something ethereal, right? And that goes to say, like, all these titles, because Baal, like, everyone's, like I was saying about Satan, everyone's so scared of like a Satan, but it's like, well, there's many different Satans. Same with Baal. Baal means Lord. You have Baal Zephon, Baal Zebul, Baal Hamon. And I think the same maybe could be with Yahweh. Like, I'm not saying, I don't know the name of God, right? I'm going to question a lot of what's told to me. And so I don't know does the creator have a name, right? Is Yahweh a title that was stolen by one of these entities to give to one of their sons, right? There's a lot of ways to look at it, because I'm not telling anyone that their spirituality is wrong. Like I said earlier, everyone has their own interpretation. I hope they have their own personal relationship with the Holy Spirit. If they do, I know I do. So yeah, man, I do think a lot of this knowledge is kept from us for a reason. And we're kind of given this, this bland version of a lot of this stuff that if you dig deeper into, you can find so much more in these stories and the symbolism and almost everything. Yeah. And so, yeah, man.
Like, what do you know about Baal Hamon? Because there's so much to go into and that influence in that whole region.
Well, I don't know much. I did an episode months ago on just the title of Baal, meaning Lord, coming from Belu, and how there are these different, but then you have Baal, right? Like, you get into like the Lord, being in the, what do we say, the Canaanite pantheon, being a son of El. And so Baal Hamon, I want to say, couldn't it have just been a king?
Well,
just the lord of this region. Was Hamon a region?
well, what they used it as was the king, or the main deity of Carthage.
Okay.
Carthage was a outpost of the Canaanite Phoenicians. And so you see the war between the Carthaginians and the Romans during the Punic Wars. And that's when Hannibal, marches into Rome on the back of an elephant. That all comes from the Baal Hamon worship down in Africa. So their two main outposts were in Africa and in Spain. And so they took a lot of the wheat from Spain, but at the same time, their empire was one of slaves. So they had entire armies equipped as slaves, kind of like the way they depict Persia in 300. It was that kind of the slave army. Well, that whole slave idea with Baal Hamon, it's him and his cohort. What's her name? I forget, but she's got this triangle glyph, right? And it's a very, very distinctive thing. And they had what they called Tophets. And at the Tophets, they would burn.
That's her name. Tanet, the chief goddess of Carthage.
Right. So at Tanet would demand these child sacrifices. And this is where you get a lot of the Moloch worship, is burning the children in these Tophets. And that was one of the reasons why Rome kept saying, we need to go back to Carthage and completely destroy them, because all they do is sacrifice their babies. It's really interesting because they come from that Canaanite Phoenician region, and there's a big crossover between them. And, why do we say amen at the end of our prayers? It's like this hamon, Amon, Re, all the rest of this stuff comes through that Egyptian influence.
Yeah. And I think when you know that, I do think with prayer, it is about intention, so I think there's something to that. I've actually talked about that a bunch. We talked about that on the first Marduk episode that we did on Elohim etymology. We did an episode on Anu, and then one on Enlil. It was kind of short. We're going to jump back into that. We're going to go into Ishkur as well, who I think translates to be Zeus. And then we did 4 episodes on Enki, 3 on Marduk, and 2 on Ningazita Thoth. We're going to do a part 3 of him in Mesoamerica. And apparently he was in other places too, or I don't know. Sometimes it maybe could be interpreted as like a son, or maybe even a student of him, right? But yeah, man, this, let's see. There was something I was going to tell you about Tanet, but I think I lost my place. I do that a lot.
I saw.
Please have the scope. Go ahead.
Well, Tanet is still in the Catholic Church. There's a great picture of the Pope and Zelensky with a little Tanet in the background. It's like, I know what they're doing.
I've seen that picture.
Right. Well, that's also, Tanet worship has kind of survived. And you can see this with the mother of that CNN host. I forget her name, but she was part of these families. The one with the gray hair. He's always on CNN talking about the presidential stuff.
Wolf?
No, not Wolf Blitzer, the other guy. It's like straight white hair. But he comes from one of these... Cooper, yeah, Anderson Cooper. He comes from one of these old families, and his mother was seen, in a picture of them on the bed with a big Tanet sculpture in the background. So there's this Tanet idea that has survived.
Oh, I know what picture you're talking about, dude. Is that the one with the thing on the wall and the guy's getting decapitated in it?
Off, yep.
Yeah, dude, that's wow. That's Tanet.
That's Tanet.
Shit, bro.
So
damn, I saw that shit years ago, man. Yeah, that picture creeped me the fuck out.
That's Tanet. If you go back and look at it and look at the seal of Tanet everywhere, that's the same triangular goddess character, and they're still doing sacrifices to her.
I'm seeing that.
She's a Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt, there you go.
Yes.
Yeah, extremely wealthy.
And she was extremely crazy too.
Yeah, this is the triangle that you're talking about right here.
Gotcha.
Which it's it's a feminine, so some people would argue and say that it could be male because of the triangle facing up, right? Because
it's also reminiscent of the Ankh.
Yes, Ethan, I was just about to say that. Yeah, very reminiscent of the Ankh, dude, which is like the first representation of the cross, right? Yeah, I thought that was cool.
And you see the Ankh has 4 parts. Of course, all crosses do, but that one does have an interesting 4 parts. So the triangle and the circle and the horizontal lines.
Well, that symbol, that's the one that they use to mark the Tophets, the areas for child sacrifice. So anytime you saw that symbol, it was a pretty good bet that they had some sort of a child sacrificial burning there.
So were they sacrificing their own children or other children, or were they actually? Were they actually? Was it sick children? Because I've seen just I ask out of just I'm left to wonder after the things I've seen.
So originally they had to sacrifice their firstborn baby boy, right? This goes back into the Bible and Abraham and his Isaac, right? And then
they actually did.
That's what they were doing back then, and that was the sacrifice to Baal Hamon through Tanet, and that was their big burning ritual. That's passing the kids through the flame. Well, they decided these wealthier families were going to start paying poor people to take their sons and then throw them in the fire. So they were paying the poor people, and that's why they had all these cymbals and loud sounding instruments around the sacrifice, so you couldn't hear the wailing of the poor people who sacrificed their son to be able to eat. So that's what their culture consisted of. This is pretty sick. And so instead of sacrificing their own sons, they started a practice called circumcision. And so they would just take the baby boy's blood at 8 days old and put that into the fire. And so the only other culture back then that was circumcising babies was the Canaanite Phoenicians for that very reason. So when you understand that, it kind of puts a different perspective on this whole thing, is because they were the only other ones doing the circumcision. And why were they doing it? So they didn't have to sacrifice their firstborn sons. They could buy one off of the street.
Yeah. And I mean, there's people that say that they can connect Moloch to Milcom and a few other deities, but I've heard a theory of Moloch being a place where they would go to sacrifice. I don't know. Are you all familiar with the guy, Esoteric Eddie? He's the homie. Love Eddie.
Yeah.
That's the prophets.
Yeah. He has a video where he basically questions, like, was Moloch a place? Right? Like, because you don't really see that name too much. Like, I don't know. I haven't really been able to connect Moloch to many other deities. I mean, I'm sure there's some you could connect to the same attributes, because even at one time, like, you can look at Bel. He was the storm god, right? And that comes from the based entity Marduk. He was depicted as a golden calf at one point. That's what Amar Utu means, Utu being solar. Because you have Utu Shamash, the sun god, Helios. The golden calf. He was depicted as a ram. I'm pretty sure he was depicted as a dragon at one point. Like, there's many interpretations. So I think that a lot of that is symbolic. But this conversation, man, I should come on here more with you guys. Yeah, my voice just cracked.
I've been trying to get you on here.
But, well, this is fucking awesome, man.
Yeah.
This is awesome. I love this. Even like, I figured, questioning some things that can make you uncomfortable. I find it healthy sometimes, especially when you have like some skepticism about things. And I think if, it can build your spiritual relationship even stronger, So I think it's good. It's good to have these conversations, guys.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Xerox is right. Yep.
Is there anything any of you guys wanted to specifically get into still? Or?
I wanted to ask, actually, I'm a little bit obsessed with numerology, and sometimes I've speculated that when there are these large numbers that the ancients were putting forth, that they weren't just arbitrary, like a lot, which is what a lot of people kind of say that they are. And there is the Sumerian Kings list, which has many of these numbers that I find are, like many of the systems that we've been talking about, putting forth an exoteric idea and also esoteric ideas. And I'm obsessed with 4 and also 108. And for people's fun, there are many different ways you can look at those numbers, but if you divide them by 108, you actually get some interesting quantities. One being, let's see if I can find it. There's the 43,200 is one of the sets of time that is said to be one of the kings. And divided by 108, that's 400. There was a few different interesting ideas in that, but that was, again, my own obsession and weirdness using 108 to interpret them. But I'm wondering what you think about those numbers.
Where does 108 come? Now, this is weird. There's a hardcore band. I grew up playing hardcore and punk. There's a hardcore band called 108, I think from Boston or New York, and they're Hare Krishna. So
there is 108 Japamala beads on the Hindu meditation prayer beads, and 72, which is the Septuagint, is 2/3 of 108. I found that to be interesting, and 36 is a third, but it comes from India, and it is where most likely it comes from. And 108 gods, 108 names for Hindu gods, rather,
for Brahma,
is one of them. And there's a lot of different ways to use it, actually mathematically and metaphysically. So I was looking at those numbers and just kind of used the 108 to divide among them, and it has some interesting summations. But I feel like there's certainly more, and I'm coming at it pretty ignorant, just using the 108 as a potential. But I feel like there is some kind of esoteric symbolism in these numbers.
There probably definitely is. Sorry, Headless.
Oh, well, I was going to say that when you take 3, 7, and 12, 3, 7, 4, and 12, right, you get, when you multiply them, you get 1008. And 1008, if you put a point after the 1008, you have the atomic weight of hydrogen. So it's like 3, 4, 7, and 12 become these numbers of manifesting. And it's like all of these numbers basically translate into the stuff we see. So in ancient times, math was more of a religion than it was a science,
Absolutely.
So having that perspective and seeing all of these gods and all of their numbers and all of the things they do in terms of number gives you a more esoteric perception on what they're doing, because a lot of this stuff has to do with the sacredness of number, because number comes out of the imagination. That's something that a lot of people don't realize, is that this is a concept that is directly connected to consciousness. So number and consciousness, number and matter, I don't think it's too big of a stretch. Like, these things are connected through consciousness.
Right. And then when you look at the Anunnaki, you see that they all have these ranks as well. They're all ranked by a certain number, usually starting at 50, with whoever has reign at that time, which is basically decided by the heavens. whatever lines up there, as above, so below. But you mentioned 72, and that's interesting because, you have the 72 versions after, in Islam. And then you have the 72 keys of Solomon in the Goetia, so it's, I think y'all are spot on with the numbers. And that's something else you get into, man. I just mentioned Islam. That's another entity that we're going to be getting into is Nanarsin, another son of who I would call El, brother of Ninurta and Ishkur. This is who I believe to be Dionysus, as well as Allah, or this angel who went to Muhammad. And this, my co-host Adrian talks about, is who created the monetary system, was this one god. He's also the father of Ishtar and Shamash, and married to a daughter of Enki as well. This is the moon god, right? So why is the crescent moon this sigil for Islam? Why do they circle a giant black cube, a Saturnian cube, and for their Hajj and kiss a meteorite? Where did that meteorite come from? So something else, that's something that we're about to dive into on Elohim etymology. So should be fun. I'll come back on, talk about that with you guys if I find out anything else about it. But some similarities there I find very interesting. He tried to manifest as Gabriel. Some people might even say he may be Gabriel, but I leave that up to interpretation. But that story of him coming to Muhammad, and it somehow aligns with Nanarsin. Now, when you look at the symbolism, it kind of confirms it for me, to be honest with you. You can read a lot of things through symbols. We know this about our everyday life and what's put in front of us on TV and in advertisement. And I've said this before, a lot of people, I think, are worshiping. All right. Sorry, kids. Worshiping these entities, but they don't even know it, right? Through clothing that we wear and songs we listen to, people that are idolized. But all this worship is rebranded. That's all it is. Just rebranded into modern day, in my opinion.
Well, the perfect example, I think, would be Attis and Cybele, right? And so with Attis and Cybele, you've got the castrated god figure, sort of a Dionysian character who cuts his junk off and creates the first pine tree, right? Attis and Cybele go back to sun worship in Rome and all the rest of this stuff. And they worshipped Cybele by encircling a black meteorite. And the black meteorite represented the first mother, Cybele, or Kubaba, as she's called in other different areas. And all that comes through Turkey. And so, Turkey, again, is sort of the influence, this sort of Eastern influence on Western culture. And they bring all of that over during the Punic Wars as a way of destroying the Carthaginians. Because the Carthaginians had, like we talked about earlier, they had that goddess, right? Well, this Cybele figure is like a more northern version of that goddess. So, They brought it into their city, and they started using this in their rituals of having these gali, as they called them, chop their nuts off and throw that into people's houses. So they had all this ritual,
That's where egg and houses came from for Halloween.
Right.
Is where trans came from? Were these the first trans people?
Sort of. Again, the Roman censors did not allow any Roman citizens to participate. So these were all slaves that were cutting their junk off to become these priests of Attis. Priestesses, actually, because they would dress them up like women afterwards. But the Gali were really into this sort of trans and this gender bending. And what do we have going on today is a lot of the same stuff. And it goes back to this black stone that they believed was the house of this goddess, and they would parade it through the streets.
Someone in the comments says peacock worship. There's something there with the peacock, also symbolic of the phoenix, right? But that goes into Malektaus, the peacock angel from Zoroastrianism. Or no, not Zoroastrianism. Shit, let me look into that real fast, guys. I apologize if y'all can hear my daughter screaming bloody murder. She is not happy right now. So let's see. When you get that, the prefix of that word, Malek, right? You see that in the Bible as well. Let's see. Let me see if I can pull this up. Malektaus. Malektaus is the name of an angel in the Yazidi region. He is also known as the peacock angel. Malektaus is the leader of the 7 divine beings created by God and responsible for all that happens on earth. So this is one of these head deities. I thought that was interesting. Somebody said peacock worship. Yeah, there's a deity attached to that. You know, doesn't mean it's like a peacock being, you know, but that's something else. You know, you see these depictions of these beings with these bird heads, and like I was saying earlier, I think that's all symbolic. Now, when you get into like the serpent stuff, that's where you can kind of veer into reptilian territory, right? I don't know, because that you can interpret that many ways too. I mean, the seraphs or the seraphim were fiery serpents, right? That's what they, you know, that's what they are described as. And so, and like I said, some people may interpret that as like light bodies, spaceships, many things, the beings themselves. But I kind of chalk it up to symbolism. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. I'm trying to think, is it in the Bible, Amalek, right? Isn't that what they refer to the Edomites as?
Well, Amalek was a tribe that was sort of down near the Sinai Peninsula, as the Jewish refugees leaving Egypt were coming through. And so they were like the first tribe that they encountered coming over into that land. And that's why, you know, the Amalekites were considered so evil, is they wanted to keep the invaders out of their land. And so God ordered them to smash the babies' heads of Amalek on the rocks.
Right. So that word Malek, right? You see this Tawusi Malek, peacock angel, Yazidi region. I don't know what the Yazidi is. I should have known that before I opened my mouth.
I believe that's in Iran.
Okay. That makes sense.
I think when I think of a peacock, esoterically speaking, it's symbolic for becoming enlightened, right? Having all your chakras clear, right? All the colors coming through and unblocked. And it's actually the very opposite, I think, of people who are, you know, cutting their junk off. Right. If you have to have surgery, that's not what that's about, right? That's an exoteric, you know, take on things. Whereas I think they do that a lot. They being the distributors of information, Headless, that you eloquently described.
Yeah, so it is related to Zoroastrianism. So glad I was right on that. Symbolism of the peacock. Yeah. I find that stuff fascinating, dude.
Hera, the wife of Zeus, her symbol was the peacock. And so she was very much in that sort of, you know, kind of mindset, always trying to go underhanded, always trying to get revenge, always, you know, doing what she could to kind of undermine the efforts of her husband, who was just going around breeding everybody. So in some ways, I see that as like that Kybali type figure. You know, she has a lot of that, because this Kybali figure was supposed to be the very first mother, and she dates back to like 2800 BC. So there's a huge connection between her and all the rest of these goddess figures throughout the region.
I didn't know how to pronounce Kybali before you said it, to be honest. I thought it was Sybil.
There's so many different ways.
Or Cybele, you know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Bible, there's so many different ways, and none of them are wrong. I think a lot of different sects had, like Kubaba. It sounds like the first word a child would say, you know? Kubaba, what does that mean, you know?
Oh, dude.
It sounds very, childlike and baby-like.
Well, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, you have Humbaba, right? So, yeah, man, I think it all, in my opinion, it all stems from this same angelic lineage. And, you know, some people, if they don't believe that these entities existed, you know, are they just stories, archetypal stories passed down and retranslated in the language of whatever culture is presenting it at the time? And that very well may be the case.
How many noises can we make with our face? Once we hear another noise, then we start using it. You know what I mean? So
right.
I think a lot of this language spread like that is like once they heard this thing and it was associated with this other thing, then you kind of that sound remained associated with it. And so even all of our sounds today.
You know what's weird? I think you brought it up, Headless, or maybe somebody else did, but I thought it might have been you. And it was even something that I had seen on social media actually not too long ago. It was like they were taking like different animals and I think speeding up their shit or slowing it down, and it all just starts to sound like another animal when you do that. It's all like, is that all, you know, what we're doing is just like the same thing? It's just a different speed, or we're hearing it at a different rate?
Yeah.
It's fucking bugged out. Yeah.
Frequency, bro. Yeah. No, I like that.
It's just weird the way I saw it, you know, presented.
Birds super fast.
I believe the ancients were very much into the things that we're into today with language, the double meanings, the etymological or phrase symbolism and sharing, right? Where it's like one little shift of the pronunciation is, you know, a body part or a esoteric idea. They love that. The Egyptians anyway really love the double entendres and so forth.
Well, yeah, and I mean, when you look at the Gnostic Gospel of John, it talks about each part of your body, there being a name for it, and that being like connected to some deity. I think each having a different name and like a different function, and so like I don't know, it's like an attachment that you have. Because I mean, regardless what anyone says, we're constantly going to be under spiritual attack. I think, you know, there's always going to be that darkness that, you know, people believe in many different things to ward off. But I've realized that some people want to think that they're all going to be forever saved, maybe in an afterlife, but in this world there will always be those dark forces constantly attacking us. And I think you could do better to ward off these low frequency spirits, beings, whatever you want to call them, you know, by understanding them in a way. Does that make any sense? You dive into this stuff a little deeper and you're able to understand it, so it's easier to kind of go about your spirituality in a way. Not by like I always say, there's a difference in researching the occult and practicing it, right? Nick knows this.
Oh yeah, for sure.
We've talked about this, and so yeah, I think it's very important to have discernment. You know what I mean? Whatever you believe in, trust in that, and you know, like I said earlier, I learned to take a lot of these things I've researched now, kind of, you know, interpret it in different ways, because I've had people give me ideas, different ways to interpret these things. I think it's never ending, to be honest with you. You could always find some kind of relation to something else or some other idea involved with what we've been talking about. So I'm sure I'll find some new connections to things like an hour after we get off of here, you know.
Like I was even saying before, you know, with the symbolism stuff. You know, because I'm saying that I think there's something to do with the eyes with certain animals doesn't mean that that's the only reason why it's used. as well. You know, there could be 6 or 7 other reasons why. You know, there could be multiple reasons.
And they could all be true.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Yes.
It could be one truth and a bunch of different, misconceptions, or it could be all different truths, just different interpretations. Perception is reality, right? So it may be on like how you perceive these things. I don't know, man. I don't know. It's you can get deeper and deeper into these conversations, guys. It just depends on how long you want to be on here.
Yeah, exactly.
May I share one thing? There's an expression, I forget who said it, wrote it, a Chinese philosopher. Signs and symbols rule the world, not rules and laws.
Is that Confucius?
And thank you. Yeah, I think so. And I think it's these symbols rule the mind of us more so when we have not explored them and don't contemplate them. When we're unaware of how they might affect us, it actually has more effect on us. So contemplating these things really leads to rising above anything that's trying to control us with them.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting, the crossover between magic and these gods when it comes to naming, right? The name of the thing is supposed to give you power over it. And in a lot of ways, like, we think that means just the sounds that come out of your mouth, but that's not true. Like, to name something, you have to really understand it. And that's how you create the name. And in a lot of ways, being able to understand this stuff and properly use that knowledge and have good spiritual hygiene is so important for not getting these attachments. And, there's lots of ways of going about effective spiritual hygiene, but I think having a spiritual hygiene routine is very important for whenever you deal with these topics, because there's a lot of ancient memories that go into this stuff that isn't necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, and I think that's the understanding with Lucifer is I think maybe over time became an egregore, but the translation to Lucifer is just through Samael, right? Like the Hebrews believed that Samael is a necessary evil, right? It's a dualistic, comes from the Kabbalah, the light and the dark. But Lucifer basically it became an interpretation for the story of Samael. Originally, it wasn't an entity at all. It was the worship of a planet, right? Venus. Now, you could say that there is an energy, perhaps, that goes along with that planet that some people interpret as an entity, kind of like Earth being Gaia, right? And so, yeah, I think it's very important to understand what you're talking about, like that, Headless. That I like that.
So for Venus especially, it rises during the morning, during 1/3 of the year. 1/3 of the year, it's not there. And then it shows up in the fall at 1/3 of the year, right? So it's broken up into, 1/3 is missing, and then it comes in the spring and then leaves in the fall, which really created this, intense Venus worship, because it's one of the brightest lights in the sky. And so having that symbol being fertility and all the rest of this stuff really makes sense for Venus. It's right there. It's doing the thing. And if you're watching the stars, you really get a good sense for what's happening on the planet. And this is one of the real motivating factors in developing, the sky clock and understanding of the planets is this massive star that only shows up during certain times of the day and night.
Yeah, and it's a feminine energy as well. Like, you have the moon and Venus being attributed to females, and then you have Mars and the sun being attributed to males. And so and so people want to say, Lucifer is a male, and it's just like, well, I don't know. But we talked about earlier, your Eye of Horus being like the feminine aspect, and so I think it's interchangeable, and I think that also goes with the dualism of a lot of these ancient occult practices. But yeah, man.
Well, I was going to say,
spot on. This is fucking awesome.
Lucifer in Roman was Eosphorus, and that was the son of the morning star.
Right.
Eosphorus, yeah. And so you've got Eos, would be the Greek goddess of dawn, and Eosphorus, which would be her son, and that would be what they used in Latin, which they even had a different word for the goddess over there of dawn. They called her Aurora. They didn't call her, but they called her by the Greek over in Rome. So it's kind of interesting. And that idea of Eosphorus doesn't really take off anywhere, right? Like, you don't see that as being a symbol of evil for them, but in the Hebrew, it's like they go nuts on this stuff. They hate the goddess of dawn. And I think that really goes back to Nergal worship, because that's who their Venus would be, is once they see the son of the morning or son of the dawn, that's when it's wartime. They're getting beat up on the most out of everybody else. So they see the son of the morning and they think to themselves, oh shit, here comes the Babylonians again. They're going to destroy our towns and stuff. That was a well-established thing with the Assyrians, is they would just go town to town, just destroying shit at the beginning of spring, So that's when you've got the morning star.
Yeah, the light bearer, dude. And I think these archetypes could be attributed to certain deities through these different times of whatever regions they were reigning in, right? Because and even with like Mars and Venus, right, it's representative of Ishtar and Shamash, who are brother and sister, right? I don't know, in these stories, I don't think they had any sexual relations. You don't really see that. Well, you see it with Enki and Enlil and their sister, but usually it's like the cousin or something that they're always having sex with, or even like their granddaughter. Like it's kind of fucked up, but and that could be interpreted as symbolic as well. I that's what I think. Some of these stories may be symbolic. I don't think they were all physically happening, especially when you look at the story of Marduk and Tiamat. It absolutely, I think, took place in the heavens. The colliding of this one planet with Earth, that, some of it broke off and made the asteroid belt. And, that's interpreted as a creation myth as well. And some people would like to, talk about Marduk slaying a dragon or whatever. I mean, that's pretty fucking cool. I'd love to look at stuff like that. Especially when you get into like the Nephilim and stuff. Like this shit's really because there was these different classes of giants as well as angels. It's fascinating stuff, man. But different interpretations. And it's the same thing with the dinosaurs, right? Like, were these dinosaurs, if they existed, were they like hybrids? Were they created from these same people as well? I think they were just dragons. I don't think most things that are presented to us, I don't think are 100% truth. Honestly, to be honest with you, truth is usually somewhere in the middle. It's just your job to kind of find it. So,
is there anything else you guys wanted to talk about? Maybe we could like wrap it up here. Maybe actually, this might be perfect timing.
Yeah.
Well, if there's anything specific, I'll keep going. No problem.
One thing, there are Nephilim burial sites in Israel that seem pretty interesting. One of them is up in the West Bank. My dad went to Israel on a trip, and they're like, well, here we have one of the Nephilim mounds. One of the giants are buried here. So they have a mound in Israel that's supposedly to one of these Nephilim king giants. So that's been around for thousands and thousands of years, like that was old by the time, Moses came out of Egypt. So, what's really going on in these places, I'm not sure, but they still have these mounds around. And what's interesting is in North America, we're surrounded by these same styled mounds as the Nephilim kings over there. So what's going on with that? What are these giants that they claim to find in these mounds? Like in Moundsville, West Virginia, they found a giant skeleton. Well, is that related back to Israel? Because they consider that the burial site of a king. Are these kings over here too? But again, no answers coming forth because, we've got a scientific establishment that doesn't accept the existence of giants as even a possibility. So
the dinosaurs are real, right?
Right.
Yeah. That's where it gets me. I'm like, okay. But this was fun, guys.
Hell yeah.
I quite enjoyed this.
Yeah, we definitely got to get you back on again, man. That was a great chat. I guess before we wrap it up, I'll let you guys all promote your stuff again. Headless, please let everybody know where they can find all your amazing work, sir.
You can find me on YouTube and on X. And if you want to give me one of your stories that we'll analyze on the air, you check out Headless Giant Podcast at gmail.com. But yeah, send me your stories there and I will read them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Headless. And Ethan, my man, let everybody know where they can find all your amazing stuff as well, sir.
That was awesome, you guys. Thanks for the great ideas. I'm on all the usual social media, and I have one website, Geometry of Energy. You can find it anyway through those words. And always appreciate sharing excellent ideas with you guys.
Oh, hell yeah. Thank you very much for jumping on. I appreciate it, Ethan. And the man himself, the guest of the last hour and 50 minutes, Jules, please let everybody know where they can find all your amazing stuff as well.
Absolutely, man, guys. This was fun. Headless, Ethan, it was good meeting you guys. Hopefully we could have more discussions like this.
Hell yeah.
Definitely. Guys, I am on Twitter at Greypilled Pod, Instagram, Greypilled_podcast. You can find me on Rumble, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Trying to start my Spreaker, but I procrastinate way too much. So also patreon.com/Greypilled Podcast. Got a lot of cool shit going on over there. Sunday Chaos tonight. Y'all come hang out, 9:00 Central. Also going on Nephilim Death Squad Wednesday morning. So I'll be hanging out with Top and Raven over there. And then later that day, we're having Shane Cashman on Sound Science. So y'all look out for that.
Nice.
Yeah, this was awesome, man. And a lot of this stuff I talk about, I know I kind of just start spewing things, but I talk about it a lot more condensed, and a lot of episodes that I have over on my channel, guys. So a lot of cool stuff you can check out over there.
Definitely. Hellas, you want to show a
merch
book?
coming soon?
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
What's up, Hellas? You want a book show? You want to show a book?
Yeah, I was just going to say, don't forget this book, The Golden Ass. Check it out. There's a lot of good information on 1st and 2nd century AD worship. So if you want to know what they were doing back then, that's the book to check out. Even though a lot of it is, mythologized, he still gives the basic premise of a lot of the different worship practices.
Nice. Thank you very much, Headless. And again, for everybody listening, especially on the live, go check out Jules' stuff. I really do think if you're a fan or a listener of the Occult Rejects, you will definitely find valuable stuff over at his channel as well. Hence why I had him on. Jules, thanks again, man, for coming on. I really had a great time. Again, I thought it was awesome when I was on your show. We had a great chat. You seemed very open-minded, and I really looked forward to getting you on here and just having a talk. Definitely have to do it again in the future. Try to do it with the same group right here. And everybody in the chat, that is what's up. There was a lot of people from his channel and mine saying a lot of awesome stuff in the chat today. It was really, it was lit. It was definitely on fire. There's a lot of good stuff in there. If people are catching the video replay or whatever after it drops, definitely pay attention to the screen. There was a lot of good stuff being said today. And Jules, get on that podcast. You don't actually have audio?
Oh, I have Spotify, but...
Oh, yeah, get on the Spreaker, man.
Yeah.
Get on Spreaker.
I've had everyone tell me. So
make that
try and hook that up today.
Go for it, man. If I have any questions, hit me up. But yeah, go check out his stuff. And again, thank you, Headless. Thank you, Ethan. And thank you, everybody in the chat. That was an awesome fucking discussion today. And look forward to doing another one. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.